Tonight, Israel's prime minister holds high-stakes meetings at the White House.
The U.S. continues to see a deal as critical to bringing the hostages home and alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian people.
The latest on the work to bring about a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Plus, U.S. officials warn of the growing terrorism threats on multiple fronts.
They seem to be united in one thing, which is calling for attacks on us.
What it means for the safety of Americans. And
so 1 out of 5 people receive the wrong diagnosis from their local pathologist.
How to navigate finding the best treatment in the face of a cancer diagnosis. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House today to rally more support for the Jewish state. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Tara Mergener.
And from the CBN Washington News Bureau, I'm John Jessup. The Israeli leader meeting with President Joe Biden in the Oval Office a day after delivering a forceful address to Congress.
He's here to defend Israel's war against Hamas in the wake of ongoing protests across the nation's capital. This marks Netanyahu's first White House visit since 2020 and comes at a time when pressure is mounting to end the 9-month-long war in Gaza. Today, he thanked the president for his service and support.
I want to thank you for 50 years of public service and 50 years of support for the state of Israel. And I look forward to discussing with you today and working with you in the months ahead on the great issues before us.
I look forward to as well. By the way, that first meeting with...
After meeting with Biden, Netanyahu visited with families of Israeli hostages in Washington. As White House officials say, they are in the final stages of a deal that will release hostages and pause the fighting in Gaza. On Friday, the prime minister heads to Mar-a-Lago to meet with former President Donald Trump.
And with that, let's bring in Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Welcome back to Faith Nation, Rabbi Cooper. So, Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington defending Israel on the global stage. How critical are these meetings with Biden and Harris today and then tomorrow with Trump? Discuss what you see being at stake here.
Well, I was with the Prime Minister 2 nights ago in Washington and was actually in Congress during that rousing speech. Netanyahu has a tremendous challenge to try to balance the political realities that change daily here in the United States, unprecedented. The challenge back home about the heartbreak that there are so many hostages, alive and dead, still being held, and the need to defeat Hamas and how you calibrate that against the backdrop of a bigger issue, which he raised over and over again, which is, at the end of the day, this is about the Iranian regime. They're starting with us in Israel, the Jewish state, and the real target is the United States of America. So his underlying theme, both privately and publicly, was we need unity, unity among Israelis, bilaterally unity between the United States, whomever's running or will be running the government, and its greatest friend and ally in the Middle East, Israel. It's quite a daunting challenge.
You were part of a group of leaders who met with Netanyahu before his address to Congress yesterday. So what was his message to those in that room?
Well, he actually opened the floor for 90 minutes of give and take with top Jewish leaders. Unusual, I think, for him. The underlying, if you had to make one word, unity. Unity within the Jewish world, whatever our political orientations might be, or attitudes about Netanyahu himself. He's not terribly popular right now in Israel. But the unity in order to see the war against Hamas through. At the same time, in his view, and I think a lot of us agree with it, the more military pressure you put on Hamas, the better it will be for the remaining hostages and the faster we can come to an end of the hostilities. Of course, he mentioned yesterday in the speech, all Hamas has to do is put down its arms, and that'll be the end of the war. So, but the key role that the United States chooses to play, or God forbid passes, is something that every capital in the Arab world, the Muslim world, and of course in Moscow, Beijing, everyone's looking at the White House and this administration in the coming months, whether they will be in the top of their game when it comes to these daunting international challenges. And they're not here to help President Biden, the United States, or Israel.
Rabbi Cooper, we just have seconds left. You saw that the trip sparked major anti-Israel protests, the burning of the Israeli and American flags, and chants in support of Hamas. How do you interpret what we're seeing today, not just on the streets, but this past spring at American universities, in just the few seconds that we have?
I think we will see it return again to the campuses. This is not only run by Palestinians, but by groups like Code Pink and others that are simply anti-American. Yesterday in Washington was a tale of two cities, an amazing event in the Capitol and the desecration of what's sacred to our history and principles on the streets of Washington. A disgrace.
All right, we're unfortunately out of time and going to have to leave it there. Rabbi Abraham Cooper with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John. Tara, see you next time.
Well, it's a new day in the race for the White House and the beginning of a long farewell for President Biden.
He addressed the nation last night to explain his decision to bow out of the election and endorse Vice President Kamala Harris. He said it's time to pass on the torch and framed the election as a battle for democracy.
It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title.
Biden praised Harris, who's won enough delegates to clinch the nomination at the party's convention in August. He did not address his party's concerns that he couldn't beat challenger Donald Trump in November. Republican critics say he didn't give a full explanation of his reason for leaving to avoid hard truths about his age and his health.
In the meantime, Donald Trump is already unleashing attacks on his new rival. At a rally last night in North Carolina, the former president accused Kamala Harris of deceiving the public about Biden's fitness for office before he dropped out of the race.
So now we have a new victim to defeat, Lion Kamala Harris, Lion, L-Y-I-N apostrophe. The most incompetent and far-left vice president in American history.
Trump also focused on Kamala Harris's other administration role, blaming Harris for the border crisis. Today, the vice president fought back. Speaking at a teachers' union convention in Texas, she called Trump, quote, an extremist, and criticized Republican views on guns and education.
While you tried to create safe and welcoming places where our children can learn, extremists attack our freedom to live safe from gun violence. They have the nerve to tell teachers to strap on a gun in the classroom.
All right, CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody is here with us now for more. David, obviously, Biden's exit from the campaign kicking up a new and brutal Trump-Harris battle. What do you think of Trump's line of attack during that rally? Is that what's going to help pull him ahead or not?
Well, that's unclear. We just don't know. But that's really the only line of attack they really have to be effective. And what do I mean by that specifically? Well, he calls her Lion Kamala, and they're going to the point that, you know, she was covering up Joe Biden's mental acuity issues. But really, I think the bigger line of attack was something he said after that, which is about the border and about the policies. I mean, he's going to try to tie Kamala to all of it. And that is unknown. I mean, you know, Joe Biden was the president. Kamala Harris was not, though she was the vice president, or she is the vice president. So, you know, whether or not voters will hold her responsible for that, I think is a gamble, but we'll see.
It's a shift from 2016 when it was Lion Ted Cruz. David, new polling since Biden stepped down suggests that Trump and Harris are virtually tied. Her vice presidential approval ratings, though, are low. So is she seeing a campaign announcement bounce, or is there really more enthusiasm for her than there was for President Biden?
Well, it's definitely a bounce. There's no doubt. But let's also remember, I mean, with all due respect and deference, I guess, to Joe Biden being president, we know he really wasn't with it. And then Kamala Harris comes along and there's a lot of energy. So just kind of like the juxtaposition between the two, that's going to obviously enthuse people quite a bit. So you have that plus the bounce. You put it all together, and you're going to get better numbers. Just remember, the national polling, just be wary of national polls. Democrats typically do better in national polls. This is all about the swing state polls. Remember, many of those national polls are registered voters, not likely voters, so there's a big difference. So take it a bit with a grain of salt.
And David Harris, along with dozens of Democratic lawmakers, sat out Netanyahu's speech to Congress. She spoke to her sorority in Indianapolis. What do you think of the optics on the world stage as it relates to her campaign? Will it make any difference?
Well, it's just horrible optics. And now the optics specifically for the Trump campaign are the empty chair behind Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, of course, we know there wasn't an empty chair, but they're putting the empty chair there to be symbolic of the fact that Harris was not there. And look, if you're going to lead on the world stage and you're not there for what typically a vice president is there for, those joint sessions of Congress, that's fodder for the Trump campaign. So it was not a good signal or not a good sign that Kamala Harris was not there. Now, she's doing it because it's politics, because she thinks that, she's got to play to the base. But I think that's a bit short-sighted politically.
All right, David Brody, thanks as always for your analysis. Boy, lots to see and watch.
You bet.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
Sounding the alarm on terror threats to the homeland. Coming up, what security experts say should be done to prevent a future attack.
And welcome back. A deadly terrorist attack could happen here in America in the near future, and that is the word from national security insiders.
And their concerns mirror the warnings leading up to the 9/11 attacks, prompting experts to urge the government to use everything it's learned since to prevent another attack. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke is here now with more. Caitlin.
John, Tara, according to top intelligence officials, 3 different terror threat categories have been identified: international, domestic, and state-sponsored. They add that right now, warning lights on all 3 are flashing red.
As I look back over my career in law enforcement, I would be hard-pressed to think of a time where so many threats to our public safety and national security were so elevated all at once.
Sounding the alarm multiple times to lawmakers, FBI Director Christopher Wray testified following the October 7th attack in Israel that the international threat is especially concerning.
These are terrorist organizations that don't typically see eye to eye, but they seem to be united in one thing, which is calling for attacks on us.
Senior defense officials echoing Wray's concern. In March, CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla singled out ISIS-K gaining strength in the Middle East, with at least 5,000 fighters whose whereabouts are currently unknown.
ISIS Khorasan retains the capability and will to attack U.S. and Western interests abroad in as little as 6 months and with little to no warning.
Most Americans have forgotten we remain at war against ISIS-K, and we've been killing a bunch of them, thank goodness.
Harvard professor Graham Allison, who served at the Pentagon in the first Clinton administration, recently joined former Deputy CIA Director Michael Morell in using Foreign Affairs magazine to send their message. They write that lawmakers should not dismiss the instincts and expertise of government officials whose warnings in the past have led to government response.
Before the year 2000, when the calendar was just turning over, there was a lot of concern because in the terrorist community, they were talking about this would be a good time for disrupting the U.S. The intelligence community took it very seriously. President Clinton took it very seriously and said, do whatever you can. So they went back and searched all of the traces of evidence about terrorists and almost by accident found a piece of information about an individual who then was stopped when he was trying to drive his car across the border from Canada, going to LA airport, where he had explosives in his car that was going to produce a big terrorist attack.
Allison also points to recent terrorism in Europe as significant. Russia already seeing 2 attacks this year, the first in March with ISIS-K attacking a concert hall, and 3 months later, a deadly attack on churches and synagogues. ISIS, meanwhile, is threatening the upcoming Paris Olympics.
So this same group whom we're at war with, whom we're actually killing, has made repeated statements about their intention to conduct a terrorist attack against us. Oh, I would take them seriously.
Meanwhile, here at home, individuals associated with Islamic terror organizations are crossing the southern border into the U.S. The FBI arrested 8 men from Tajikistan just last month. All entered illegally, yet still underwent vetting before being allowed in.
At this point, they're not worried about sneaking into the country. They're already here. At this point, they're in the planning stages or in the operational phase where they're looking at targets.
Former intelligence official Michael Pregent says 30 years of counterterrorism experience leads him to believe America is most likely to experience an attack after the November presidential election.
If I'm a terrorist leader, I don't attack before that. I get everything in place. You know, we see what happens with the election. I'll have people harass polling sites and keep people from voting on election day.
Both Allison and Pregent stressed the president's primary responsibility as commander-in-chief is to keep America safe, and that must remain the priority even during a chaotic election year. Allison adds the Biden administration must act as its predecessors, ordering the intelligence community to remain on high alert and not hesitate to launch a comprehensive counterterrorism campaign. John, Tara.
So, Caitlin, the Hudson Institute expert that was in your report mentioned terror cells are already here in the United States. Can you give any examples of how we might already be seeing their influence here?
Well, just yesterday, during Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, he accused Iran of fueling and funding much of the anti-Israel rhetoric, protests, and violence here in the U.S. And our own intelligence community says Iran is becoming increasingly aggressive in their efforts to influence Americans ahead of the November election. That's happening through social media platforms, but also through things like the protests that we saw this week. We actually had a videographer around the Capitol and at Union Station yesterday, and he says he spotted not just pro-Hamas and pro-ISIS demonstrators, but rather people he believes were actual members of those terrorist organizations.
Boy, terrifying, Caitlin. And these warnings, and in the wake of the Trump assassination attempt, what does that mean to the elevated threat environment for prominent public officials?
As FBI Director Christopher Wray told lawmakers just yesterday, this is the highest threat level he's seen in his career, and it's a very dangerous time to be in the public eye. I spoke with a former Secret Service agent who pointed out that the shooter in the Trump assassination attempt was just a rookie, yet he got 8 shots in on a former president, one of those shots grazing Trump's ear. Well, what we also know now is that Iran is plotting to assassinate him as well. And if a rookie could get that kind of access, what happens when it's a trained terrorist with the same objective? This is why experts are saying we need to see a lot more from law enforcement and the current administration if we're going to prevent these kinds of attacks.
All right, indeed, Caitlin, thank you. Well, up next, millions of Americans are diagnosed with cancer each year. What you should do after receiving a diagnosis. Welcome back. About 2 million Americans receive a cancer diagnosis each year. And a sobering report from the American Cancer Society finds the disease will increase as the population ages and grows. In 2022, an estimated 20 million new cancer cases were diagnosed worldwide. That number is expected to jump to 35 million by 2050. The findings show that globally, lung cancer is the most common and deadly form of cancer in men, followed by prostate and colorectal cancer. Now, for women, breast cancer is the most common, followed by lung and colorectal cancer.
Those are startling statistics. You know, when you or someone you know or love faces a cancer diagnosis, it's easy and natural to feel anxious or even allow your mind to go to the worst places.
Absolutely. And one cancer expert recommends taking certain steps immediately after a diagnosis to give you the best chance at fighting the disease. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson has the details.
Often, when a primary care physician shows concern about a lump in the breast or an elevated PSA, they may mention cancer and recommend tests. Before jumping to conclusions, patients should see a cancer specialist. Dr. Michael Sakaris recommends getting a biopsy because chances are you'll feel relieved.
One study for people who had swollen lymph nodes that were suspected to be cancer actually found that only 17% of those people, when they went to an oncologist, got a formal diagnosis of cancer.
If the biopsy indicates cancer, Dr. Sakaris recommends getting a second opinion, specifically from a doctor who focuses on that type of cancer. Part of his reasoning is that a second opinion dramatically downgraded his own mother-in-law's diagnosis.
He retested her for everything, and it turns out she didn't have stage 3 lung cancer that had spread. She had stage 1, confined to one area.
Research shows that result is rather common.
There was disagreement 20% of the time. So 1 out of 5 people received the wrong diagnosis from their local pathologist, and that resulted in the wrong treatment 7% of the time.
It's helpful for a family member to accompany the patient on doctor appointments to help take notes on what's said. That's because studies show memory can fail us.
When recall for information about treatment and side effects was assessed in 69 older adults with cancer, respondents were correct only 23% of the time.
And in the age of social media or going to Dr. Google, be wary of online medical information.
Another study concluded that 67%, so 2/3 of cancer information that was shared on social media was accurate, but 1/3 was inaccurate.
While cancer can be a big deal, follow the expert's advice and make sure you have a reliable diagnosis before getting too concerned, since many cancers are survivable. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thank you, Lori. Coming up, patriotism on display right here in the nation's capital. That's next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, a man is being hailed a patriot after his act to save the American flag went viral.
And it came in response to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to the United States. On Wednesday, anti-Israel protesters attacked Old Glory, tearing down and burning the American flags at Union Station. One unnamed patriot, though, rushing into the burning heap and successfully saving a fragment of that flag. Later that evening, a group of congressmen, including veterans and the Speaker of the House, gathered at Union Station and together raised the Stars and Stripes again.
Back where it belongs.
Thank goodness. Gotta have heroes, right?
That's right. Thanks so much for watching.
We'll see you.